The Earth trembled as the message echoed across every communication device. A cold, unyielding voice reverberated through the airwaves, as though it had emerged from the depths of space itself, bypassing every defense humanity had. Surrender and pay tribute to the Galactic Empire, or face total annihilation. Every human who heard it froze. No one had prepared for this. For weeks, Earth had been under a false sense of peace. The skies had remained clear, the stars twinkling as they always did. And then, without warning, they came. Hundreds, thousands of ships, each as large as cities, appeared in Earth's orbit with no prior signal. No scout ships. No diplomatic messages. Just a presence so overwhelming, it made every country on Earth's surface tremble in terror. The Galactic Empire, a name whispered in fear for millennia by those who had encountered it, had arrived on Earth's doorstep. Humanity, in its arrogance, had assumed that the universe's vastness would protect it. But now, as every broadcast station flickered to life with the same chilling message, it was clear, Earth was not exempt. The Empire had spoken, and it didn't care for the politics of human nations. Across the globe, every world leader gathered in a tense, urgent summit. They had no answers, no contingency plans, no experience with a force this powerful. The Empire's ships were not only massive, they were armed with weapons that could shatter entire continents with a single strike. What could Earth possibly offer to appease such a foe? What could any human force hope to do against something that commanded the stars themselves? Inside the United Nations headquarters, diplomats and generals huddled around screens, waiting for any word from the defense ministries. The room was a mix of panic and denial. Many hadn't believed this day would come. And then, President Leonard Adams of the United States spoke, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of fear. We can't just comply. We're not going to surrender. But what else could they do? His words had barely settled in the air when the first wave of signals came in from the military. Every attempt to communicate with the alien ships had been blocked. Attempts to launch a counteroffensive had been thwarted before they could even get off the ground. Earth's entire satellite network was disabled in mere seconds. The Galactic Empire wasn't just coming to demand tribute, it was coming to annihilate. The leaders of Earth had barely a moment to react before a loud, chilling hum filled the room, and the digital screens around them began to flash, revealing an unmistakable symbol, a jagged, angular design resembling a star in the midst of collapsing. The Empire's insignia. And the voice came again, this time with a final, terrifying command. You have 5 hours to comply. If you do not, we will begin the extermination. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of air conditioning and the shuffling of papers as frantic discussions broke out among the assembly. Some argued for surrender. Others demanded resistance. But there was one thing they all agreed on. Humanity had no chance of surviving an outright war with the Empire. Adams sat back in his chair, his face pale but resolute. There were no easy answers, no words that could make this better, no strategic maneuvering to gain an edge. Earth wasn't ready for this. But what struck him the most wasn't the message or the ships overhead. It was the realization that humanity was utterly alone in this. How do we fight an enemy that can destroy us without even trying? A young strategist asked quietly, unable to keep the fear from his voice. Adams looked out the window at the blue planet below. He couldn't find an answer in the vastness of the sky. He couldn't find any way to protect humanity from what was coming. But he did know one thing. The Empire had underestimated one critical factor, the resilience of humanity. As the generals and diplomats continued to argue, one figure remained silent, a figure who had been called out of retirement for this very moment, a former military officer, known for his unorthodox tactics. Major General Thomas Graves, one of Earth's most decorated war heroes, stood up, his face stoic. I suggest we run. The room fell into stunned silence. Run? How could they possibly run from a force that had already laid waste to countless civilizations? But before anyone could speak, Graves continued. We don't stand a chance if we try to fight them on their terms. We can't match their strength, but we have something they don't: the will to survive. And with that, the plan began to form. Not to fight, not to surrender, but to escape, to run, and to hope that somehow the unthinkable could happen. But as Adams looked back up at the sky, his heart heavy with the weight of their fate, one question lingered in his mind. Would running be enough? And the countdown had already begun. End of Chapter 1. The ground shook as the first missile was launched, a desperate, uncoordinated attempt to strike back against the Empire. It was futile. Earth's military forces had no chance to even reach the enemy's ships before they were obliterated in a flash of light. The missile had barely left the silo when the Empire's fleet responded. In the blink of an eye, a beam of blinding energy shot from the lead ship, slicing through the missile with ease. There was no explosion, no dramatic flare, just instant annihilation. As the scattered remains of the weapon disintegrated, every military commander on Earth knew that humanity's first and last attempt at retaliation had failed. Inside Earth's Strategic Command Center, a harsh silence hung over the room. Generals and officers stood motionless, their eyes glued to the holographic map showing the Empire's advancing ships. The global communications network was down. Military satellites had been knocked offline within minutes of the alien ships arriving in Earth's orbit. The planet had become a sitting duck. President Adams stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the chaotic world below. Cities were in lockdown, panic spreading like wildfire. Military forces scrambled to evacuate civilians. But deep down, everyone knew there was nowhere to hide. "We can't keep running," one of his advisors said, his voice tight with fear. "We need to strike back. We need to show them that we're not just going to roll over." Adams turned slowly, his face grim. "And what will that accomplish? We're outclassed, outgunned. Every single attempt to resist them has failed. It's not a question of whether we can win. It's a question of survival." Before anyone could respond, the communication screen in the center of the room flickered to life. The same cold, imperious voice boomed across the room again, its presence almost suffocating. "Your defiance is noted, humans, but futile. You have 72 hours to comply with the demands of the Galactic Empire, or we will eradicate your civilization." The voice paused, then added "Consider this your final warning." The screen went black. Silence filled the room once more. The time for diplomacy or even a semblance of hope was gone. The entire planet had been thrust into a game of survival, one where humanity's options were rapidly dwindling. As the hours dragged on, Earth's leadership scrambled for a solution. Every possibility they explored ended with the same result. Resistance was impossible. The Empire's technology was far beyond anything Earth had, and their fleet could wipe out entire countries with a single strike. The question was no longer how to win, but how to stay alive. In the midst of this chaos, a new voice emerged, a voice from an unexpected quarter. Major General Thomas Graves, once a decorated officer known for his unconventional tactics, had been called back into service, though no one expected him to offer any more than a few words of advice. But when the president turned to him for a suggestion, Graves' eyes were unwavering. "We don't fight them on their terms," Graves said, his voice low and filled with certainty. "We don't face them head-on. We run." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence wasn't filled with disbelief. It was the sharpness of a realization dawning. Graves' words cut through the tension like a blade, offering a solution where none had seemed possible. "What do you mean?" someone asked, a hint of disbelief still present. "We have no chance in a direct confrontation," Graves continued. "We're too small, too weak, and we're too spread out. But we do have one advantage: they underestimated us. They think we're a primitive species, easy to control, easy to break." He paused, scanning the faces of the room. "But they haven't seen what humanity can do when backed into a corner. We run. We regroup. We buy time and learn. And then we fight." The response was immediate, part skepticism, part reluctant acceptance. What else could they do? A full-scale war with the Empire was impossible. But running, evacuating, and regrouping might buy Earth the precious time it needed to discover a way to strike back. As the plan began to take shape, the most pressing question remained. Where would they run? There were no safe zones on Earth. No countries with the technology or military strength to withstand the Empire's power. The only hope was to evacuate, survivors hidden in the depths of space, far from the Empire's reach. The question of where humanity would go became a priority. Graves' next words were chilling in their simplicity. We leave the planet. And just like that, the most audacious plan in human history was set into motion. As the world's governments scrambled to mobilize every spacecraft and civilian vessel they could, it became clear that Earth's survival depended on one thing: time. Time to escape, time to understand the alien enemy, and time to regroup. But with the Empire's ships closing in, that time was running out fast. The first steps were taken immediately. Evacuation protocols were enacted, and humanity's best minds were already working to develop any technology that could shield or protect the escaping ships. But for every minute that passed, the pressure increased. And as Earth's remaining military assets were quickly repurposed for the evacuation, Major General Graves couldn't shake one nagging thought. The Empire's fleet was powerful, unstoppable even. But humanity had one thing the Empire hadn't accounted for: its relentless will to survive. End of Chapter 2. The hum of the underground facility was deafening. A low mechanical thrum that seemed to echo through the bones of every scientist, soldier, and engineer within. Deep beneath Earth's surface, humanity's last hope was waking up. The world above was in chaos. As the Empire's ships hovered just outside Earth's atmosphere, the planet's governments scrambled to implement their desperate evacuation plans. But in a hidden facility, far from prying eyes, the real battle for humanity's survival had begun. Major General Thomas Graves stood in the control room, his eyes fixed on the monitor that displayed an intricate series of glyphs and symbols no human had ever seen before. This was humanity's secret weapon, the one they hoped would tip the scales in their favor. A weapon far older than anything Earth had ever encountered. An ancient artifact, unearthed decades ago during a covert expedition, whose origins were shrouded in mystery. The scientists had been studying it for years, but it was only now, with Earth's fate hanging in the balance, that they realized its true potential. The technology wasn't just advanced, it was alien. But it was also powerful beyond comprehension. Is it ready? Graves asked, his voice tight with both hope and trepidation. Dr. Evelyn Vargas, the lead scientist, looked up from the holographic display. It's active, General. But we're still figuring out how to fully control it. We've been running simulations, but nothing can truly predict its effects. This thing, whatever it is, defies all logic. Graves' jaw tightened. Does it work? Vargas hesitated. It's working, but we're not sure what it will do once we deploy it. If the Empire can't disable it, then it could be humanity's last line of defense. But if we lose control... She trailed off, unwilling to voice the worst-case scenario. The room grew quiet, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Graves turned back to the screen, his mind racing. The Empire's fleet was closing in on Earth, the countdown ticking relentlessly toward extinction. If this was their only hope, they had to take the risk. He turned to Vargas. We don't have time. If we wait too long, there will be nothing left to fight for. Activate it. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Vargas nodded, fingers flying over the console, her eyes scanning the alien symbols on the screen. The room held its breath as a low rumble filled the air. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, suddenly, the air in the facility grew dense, vibrating with a strange energy that seemed to reverberate through the walls themselves. General, Vargas said, her voice strained. It's starting to change things. We're seeing fluctuations in the fabric of space-time. Reality itself seems to be warping. Graves felt a chill crawl down his spine. The weapon was working, but in ways no one could have predicted. As he stared at the screen, the world around him seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from asphalt. Time seemed to slow. Objects in the room appeared to blur and flicker, as if they were flickering between different moments in time. "We're not in control of it anymore," Vargas said, her voice tinged with fear. It's reshaping the space around us." Graves clenched his fists, fighting the panic rising in his chest. The weapon was a gamble, but it was humanity's only chance now. If they couldn't stop the Empire, this was their last resort. "Can we send it out?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can we use it against them?" Vargas nodded slowly, though her face was pale with uncertainty. "We can try, but I can't guarantee it won't backfire. If it reshapes space, it could affect everything, including the fleet. We're not even sure it's fully calibrated to target them." The air in the room crackled with tension as Graves gave the order to deploy the weapon. "Activate it. Now." Without another word, Vargas manipulated the controls. The room filled with a strange, almost musical hum as the weapon's energy coalesced into a focus beam, an impossible force concentrated into a singular point. For a brief moment, everything held still, the world waiting to see if humanity's gamble would pay off. And then, without warning, the entire facility was shaken by a massive tremor, as if a planet had shifted beneath their feet. The air grew thick with a magnetic pulse, and the world outside seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. Graves' heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the screen again. The beam of energy had left the facility, streaking through the atmosphere toward the Empire's fleet. But it didn't just hit them. It tore through the very fabric of space around them, creating an impossible distortion. The Empire's fleet began to flicker, its ships twisting and distorting, as if they were caught in an unknown force beyond their comprehension. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the energy faded, leaving only the eerie silence of space. "Did it work?" Graves whispered, his voice barely audible. Vargas's face was a mask of disbelief. I don't know. We've never seen anything like this. They're not responding. We've disturbed their fleet in ways we don't fully understand." As the seconds ticked by, Graves didn't wait for an answer. He only had one thought in mind. The Empire might not understand what had just happened, but they would soon. And when they did, Earth's fight for survival would be far from over. The skies above Earth twisted, darkened, and trembled as the Empire's fleet flickered between dimensions. A ripple in space that no one could comprehend, as if reality itself was bending and breaking in the wake of humanity's desperate move. In the dead silence of the command room, Major General Thomas Graves watched as the monitors flickered erratically. The energy beam fired from Earth's secret weapon had impacted the Empire's fleet, but the results were unpredictable, disorienting at best, catastrophic at worst. "The Empire's fleet is distorting," Dr. Evelyn Vargas muttered, her voice laced with disbelief. "They're shifting in and out of phase, like they're caught between dimensions." Graves' pulse quickened. The weapon had worked, far more effectively than anyone could have anticipated. But at what cost? The Empire was not reacting. They were being affected, yes, but the situation was far from under control. Vargas continued to monitor the data, her fingers tapping frantically across the controls. "It's like they're trying to adapt to the weapon's effects, but their ships aren't designed for this. The distortions are eating away at their systems. We might have thrown them off balance, but this could also cause a full system collapse." Graves gritted his teeth, trying to suppress the rising panic in his chest. Time was running out, and Earth's window to escape was closing rapidly. The Empire would recover from this. They would adapt, and when they did, Earth wouldn't stand a chance. "Prepare the evacuation," Graves ordered, his voice sharp. "We don't have much time. Get every ship off the ground. Get the civilians out of here." The room erupted into a flurry of activity as military officers and engineers scrambled to execute the orders. Every available spacecraft, from military transports to civilian vessels, was being prepped for takeoff. But even as Graves gave the order, a heavy weight pressed down on him. It was not enough. It would never be enough. "General," Vargas said, her tone urgent, "we need to accelerate the timeline." The weapon might have delayed the Empire, but it's not a permanent solution. We've lost the element of surprise. They'll recalibrate soon. I know, Graves replied, his eyes narrowing. That's why we're running. As the sound of frantic preparations filled the room, Graves' mind raced. Earth wasn't ready for what came next. They had a few ships, a handful of survivors, and an untested weapon. But there was something else they had to rely on, something even more important than the weapon itself. The will to survive. As Graves left the command room, heading for the underground hangar where Earth's remaining fleet was being prepared for launch, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that gnawed at him. Humanity's future was no longer certain. The plan to evacuate was their only chance. But what kind of future could they hope for, running from a war they had no hope of winning? The escape plan wasn't a strategic maneuver. It was desperation. The ships were crewed, hastily outfitted for the exodus of as many civilians as possible. There were no guarantees they would even make it off the planet before the Empire retaliated. And the moment they left Earth's atmosphere, they would be on their own. But what other choice did they have? Graves arrived at the hangar just in time to see the first wave of ships being loaded. Military personnel, scientists, and civilians were being rushed into the cramped interiors of the vessels, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. There was no time for speeches, no time for reassurances. All they had was this single moment to escape before the Empire finished its recalibration. General Graves, Captain Samuel Marks, called out from across the hangar. We're ready to launch. The civilians are secure, and the fleet's prepared for departure. Graves nodded, his jaw tight. Good. But we're not just running. We need to buy time for the rest of humanity. This first wave will lead them off-world, but the real battle will be fought in the stars. Marks raised an eyebrow. How, sir? The Empire has us outmatched in every way. Graves' eyes darkened as he looked at the ships taking off in the distance. We'll figure it out. We have too. The hangar doors began to close behind them as the first ship lifted into the sky. Graves' heart pounded in his chest. The Empire was not waiting. As the ships ascended, the sky above seemed to pulse with an eerie light, an unsettling reminder that the alien fleet was still there, still looming over Earth. Sir, Vargas's voice crackled through the comms. We're reading multiple incoming energy signatures from the Empire. They're recalibrating faster than we anticipated. They've already begun launching countermeasures. The hairs on the back of Graves' neck stood on end. The Empire wasn't waiting any longer. They were coming. Push the fleet to maximum speed, Graves ordered, his voice steady but urgent. We need to get as far as we can before they lock onto us. The fleet, still small and vulnerable, tore through Earth's atmosphere, heading toward the outer reaches of the solar system. Graves watched through the hangar's observation window as the planet, his planet, disappeared behind them, swallowed by the vastness of space. There was no turning back now, as the ships entered deep space, leaving behind the only home they had ever known. The tension in the air was palpable. The Empire would not let them escape so easily. The fight for survival had only just begun, and this time running wasn't enough. Space wasn't empty. It was filled with the cold weight of waiting. The survivors of Earth's evacuation drifted among the stars, with the oppressive knowledge that the Empire's shadow loomed just beyond the edge of the solar system. The fleet had barely cleared Earth's atmosphere when the first signs of the Empire's counterattack arrived. From deep space, energy signatures blazed across the sensor array, each one as destructive as a star being born. The Empire was coming. Major General Thomas Graves stood in the command center of the lead ship, staring at the vast emptiness of space on the main display. The dark void felt suffocating, a silent reminder that their escape had only bought them time. The Empire's response had been swift, and their power crushing. We have no idea where they're coming from, Captain Mark said, glancing at the readouts. The fleet's too large to hide, but they're not transmitting any signals. They're moving too fast to track. How do we prepare for something we can't even see? Graves' mind raced. He had known the escape wasn't a permanent solution, but seeing the raw power of the Empire up close was another thing entirely. Every calculation they had made in the past few days had been predicated on one assumption, that the Empire would focus on Earth itself. They hadn't expected the alien fleet to follow them so quickly. "We don't," Graves said, his voice cold. "We prepare for everything. The last thing we need is to think we can predict what they'll do next." The fleet was scattered across space in small, tightly organized groups, each one carrying the last of Earth's civilians and military assets. The survivors had fled, but what did that mean now? Would they be hunted down one by one, or would they find refuge somewhere in the cold expanse of the galaxy? "We've received some communication from the other ships," Marks continued. "Most of the fleet's still intact, but they're rattled. People are scared." Graves nodded, his jaw tightening. The fear wasn't unfounded. Every ship in their fleet was outmatched. Humanity's last remaining weapons were still untested, and the alien empire's technology was far superior. The only advantage they had was their unpredictability, the one thing the Empire had never accounted for. "Keep the fleet in formation," Graves ordered. "We need to act fast. We need allies." Marks raised an eyebrow. "Allies? With whom? No one in this part of the galaxy knows us, and the Empire's already moved too far to negotiate." "Not negotiation," Graves said, his voice firm. "We find those who've resisted the Empire before." The survivors of Earth were more than just refugees. They were humanity's best hope for rebuilding. But they couldn't rebuild if they were alone. Graves had learned that the hard way. The Empire had crushed civilizations with ease, but there had to be other species who had fought back or at least survived. "We need to find them. Contact every known resistance group in this sector. There has to be someone who's dealt with the Empire and survived." His voice hardened with a resolve he hadn't felt before. "We make them our allies, or we find a way to fight this war ourselves." With that, Graves signaled to the communication officers. "Send out the distress signals. Let's see if anyone's out there." As the comms team initiated the broadcast, Graves stepped back and allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had run, yes, but now they had to prove they weren't just hiding. They weren't just waiting to be picked off. Humanity wasn't finished yet. "General," Vargas's voice came through the comms. "We've detected a strange energy signature near the edge of the system. It's not the Empire's fleet. It might be something else." Graves' pulse quickened. It could be the ally they were hoping for, or it could be another Empire scout sent to track them down. "Prepare the fleet," Graves ordered. "We're going to find out who, or what, that is." The fleet shifted into motion, cautiously moving toward the unknown energy signature. As the ships accelerated through the void, every officer, every crew member, was tense with anticipation. This could be the moment that decided whether humanity had a future, or if they were simply scattered remnants, hiding in the dark corners of the galaxy. Graves stood tall, watching the ships move as one. Whatever lay ahead, it was clear now. Earth's survival would depend not only on their ability to run, but on their capacity to fight back, whether alone or alongside whoever might answer their call. The Empire was out there, closing in. But for the first time since the Exodus, Graves allowed himself a glimmer of hope. They weren't alone. Not yet. The energy signature was growing brighter, pulsing with power. As the fleet closed in on it, Major General Thomas Graves felt the first real hope in weeks, a distant possibility that they might not face the Empire alone after all. For days, the fleet had moved in a tense, silent formation, awaiting the unknown. Every ship in Earth's last remaining fleet was on high alert. They were far from home, far from their familiar world, and every moment could bring them closer to their end. But as they approached the source of the strange energy signal, the possibility of survival loomed. Graves stood at the command center, watching the monitor intently. "We're approaching the source," Captain Marks reported. "It's still there, but it's fluctuating. Hard to get a solid reading." "Hold course," Graves commanded. "Keep steady." The fleet had been forced to rely on limited resources. Its ships pieced together from what remained of Earth's military assets and civilian transports. They were not built for war, they were built for escape. And yet, As they drew closer to the source of the signal, they had one thing the Empire did not: desperation. The stars outside the window seemed to blur and pulse as the fleet maneuvered cautiously. Graves clenched his fists. They couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. Every ship counted. Every soul aboard was humanity's last hope. "We've got a visual," Mark said suddenly, his voice tight. "It's a ship, or something that looks like one. It's massive, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen." Graves' heart skipped a beat. "Show me." The screen flickered to life, revealing a silhouette in the dark void of space. A gargantuan structure, alien and imposing, its surface alive with energy pulses. It was unlike any ship Graves had ever encountered. Its design was a blend of sharp angles and flowing curves, and its energy output was staggering. This was no ordinary ship, it was a fortress. "Is it hostile?" Graves asked, his voice steady but tense. Marks shook his head. "I don't know. No signs of weaponry, yet. But the way it's projecting power, it feels like it's waiting." "Then we wait," Graves replied. "Open a channel." As the communication link was established, the silence stretched. Every person in the fleet waited, breath held, as they anticipated whatever came next. Finally, the screen flickered, and a figure appeared on the display, an alien, tall and regal, with markings that glowed faintly along its skin. Its eyes locked onto Graves with a cold, calculating gaze. "We have received your signal," the alien spoke, its voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "We know what you seek." Graves didn't hesitate. "We need your help. The Empire is coming for us, and we cannot stop them alone. Will you fight with us?" The alien's expression remained unreadable. "You are humans. Your species has not been known to us. Yet you have survived longer than many. Perhaps you are more than you appear." Graves' patience was wearing thin. "We don't have time for riddles. Either you help us, or we face extinction." The alien considered him for a long moment before responding. "We have watched the empires rise. We have seen the destruction they leave in their wake. But we will not intervene lightly. Your people must prove you are worth saving." Graves' jaw tightened. He knew the stakes. "What do we need to prove?" The alien tilted its head slightly. "Survive." Without another word, the alien's image flickered off the screen. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Graves with a heavy silence. It was clear, this was not an ally eager to help, but one testing humanity's resolve. But they had no choice but to accept the challenge. "Prepare the fleet," Graves ordered, his voice hard. "If survival is what they require, then we will show them just how much we're capable of." As the fleet began to position itself in preparation for whatever came next, Graves allowed himself a moment to think. The alien ship had offered no guarantees. It hadn't promised victory, only that humanity must prove it deserved to live. It was a dangerous gamble, but for the first time since the Exodus, Graves felt a spark of hope. The Empire was still out there, but now they were not alone. The time for running was over. The final stand had begun.